We are taught to believe in heroes, those who run towards danger when everyone else runs away. We expect them to protect us, to be the shield against the storm. But what happens when the very people sworn to save you stand by and watch your world burn to the ground, consumed not just by flames, but by hatred? This is the harrowing true story of David Sterling, a man who lost everything to a racist fire. And what happened next didn't just shake his world, it ignited a nation. Stick with us, because this is a journey from the ashes of injustice to the triumph of unwavering spirit. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? It was an evening that started like any other, a symphony of calm descending upon the rolling hills of Malibu. The sun, a flamboyant painter, dipped below the horizon, smearing the sky with strokes of gold and crimson, a spectacle of peace that belied the gathering storm. In the heart of this gilded tranquility stood the Sterling Sanctuary, a marvel of modern architecture carved into the very landscape. This wasn't just a house. It was David Sterling's masterpiece, a testament to a life built from humble beginnings. As a renowned screenwriter, David had penned stories that moved millions. But this home, every beam, every window overlooking the vast Pacific, was his most personal narrative, a symbol of resilience, dedication, and the American dream realized. Inside, the air hummed with a warmth far richer than the Californian evening. David, a man whose hands often conjured worlds on paper, now held a steaming mug of coffee, savoring a rare moment of stillness. His wife Maria, a force of gentle strength, was engrossed in a book on the plush living room couch, her calm presence a steady anchor. Their children Lena and Caleb were lost in a cacophony of giggles and strategic moves over a board game spread across the floor. This was their rhythm, their sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed off the high ceilings and dreams took root in the sun-drenched gardens. They had carved out a slice of paradise in the Malibu hills, a place where the grandeur of nature met the comfort of home, a seemingly impenetrable fortress against the world's chaos. But even paradise held its vulnerabilities. The first whisper of change was almost imperceptible, a faint, distant roar. David glanced up, his writer's mind instantly trying to identify the sound. Was it a far-off jet? A trick of the wind? He walked to the sprawling floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze sweeping the horizon. And then he saw it. A sinister orange glow, a bruise on the fading sky, bleeding over the distant hills. Thin plumes of smoke, like silent specters, began to rise, painting the twilight in ominous hues. David's chest tightened. Wildfires weren't uncommon in California. They were a yearly ritual of destruction and renewal. Yet this time, the glow seemed unnervingly close, a chilling proximity that tightened the knot of dread in his stomach. He set his coffee down, the forgotten warmth a stark contrast to the sudden chill that gripped him. "Hey, babe, look at this," he said, his voice a low rumble, gesturing towards the window. Maria followed his gaze, her brow furrowing as the beauty of the sunset twisted into something more ominous. The air grew heavy, thick with an acrid, earthy scent that hadn't been there moments before. It was the smell of burning chaparral, of dry earth surrendering to flame. David's fingers instinctively went to his phone, punching in the familiar numbers for the Canyon Creek Fire Services. The line rang, then clicked, connecting him to an automated voice, then a curt, robotic operator. "Canyon Creek Fire Services. All lines are busy. Please hold." He held impatiently as a detached voice listed fire safety tips. The absurdity of it gnawed at him. His home was potentially in danger, and he was being lectured by a machine. When a live person finally answered, their tone was clipped dismissive. "Look, sir, we're stretched thin tonight. We're dealing with multiple fronts. We'll get to you when we can." The words hung in the air, cold and unfeeling. It was a brush-off, a casual dismissal that pricked at David's pride. But more importantly, it ignited a spark of fear. He had spent his life crafting heroes who always arrived in the nick of time. But in this real-life emergency, the heroes seemed absent, or worse, indifferent. This was the first chilling realization they might be on their own. As darkness fully claimed the sky, the orange glow intensified now, a monstrous flickering presence devouring the horizon. Text messages from neighbors began to flood David's phone, each one a testament to the fire's ruthless advance. "It's moving fast. Evacuate. We're leaving now. The winds are picking up." Then a gentle knock at the door. It was Ms. Eleanor Vance, their elderly neighbor, her face etched with concern, her hands trembling. "David, Maria, you have to go. It's coming too fast. I saw embers landing in the dry brush down the canyon." Her voice, usually soft, was laced with an urgency that sent shivers down David's spine. The casual calm of their evening had dissolved, replaced by a frantic scramble. David had to calmly explain to Lena and Caleb that they needed to leave to pack essentials. He tried to keep his voice steady, a mask of control for his children, while his gut twisted with panic. He was a storyteller by trade, but this unfolding narrative was one he desperately wished he could rewrite. He glanced back at his home, the dream he had built, now vulnerable, exposed to the elements and the chilling indifference of those sworn to protect. He knew with a certainty that made his blood run cold that this was just the beginning. The golden sunset had given way to the whispers of doom, and the storm was only just beginning to gather. The California sun, a golden orb descending behind the Malibu hills, painted the sky in hues of amber and rose. Inside the modern mansion, nestled amidst the verdant slopes, David Sterling, a name synonymous with gripping narratives and blockbuster screenplays, savored a rare moment of peace. A steaming mug of coffee warmed his hands as he gazed out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. This wasn't just a house. It was a testament to a dream meticulously crafted brick by painstaking brick from the ground up. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with the laughter of his children Lena and Caleb, whose playful shouts now punctuated the quiet hum of the evening as they conquered a board game spread across the sprawling living room floor. His wife Maria, ever the anchor of their lives, was engrossed in a book on the plush sofa, a picture of serene contentment. This was their sanctuary, built not just with money, but with the sweat of ambition and the glue of unwavering love. But in the Golden State, where dreams were forged in sunlight, danger often lurked in the shadows. A faint, almost distant roar, subtly different from the usual rumble of an airplane, began to intrude upon the evening's tranquility. David, a man whose craft demanded an acute awareness of subtle shifts in narrative, felt a prickle of unease. He scanned the horizon, and there it was, a sinister orange glow, barely a whisper on the distant hills, yet unsettling in its presence. Thin plumes of smoke, like ominous brushstrokes, began to stain the twilight sky. His chest tightened. Wildfires were a recurring nightmare in Los Angeles, a grim reality woven into the fabric of life in the hills. But this time, the glow seemed unnervingly close, too intimate for comfort. He set his coffee down the lukewarm porcelain, a stark contrast to the sudden chill spreading through his veins. Walking over to Maria, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, babe. Look at this," he said, gesturing toward the window. Maria followed his gaze, and her serene expression slowly gave way to one of mounting concern. "It's getting closer, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice laced with a worry she tried to mask. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, a faint acrid scent of smoke beginning to permeate the otherwise pristine air conditioning. The phone lines were jammed, a frantic cacophony of worried voices echoing David's own mounting panic. After what felt like an eternity, he finally got through to Canyon Creek Fire Services. "Yes, our address is 1420 Serenity Ridge." He rattled off, his voice tight with urgency. The response was curt, robotic, and chillingly dismissive. "Sir, we're experiencing extremely high call volumes. We'll dispatch a unit when one becomes available." There was no empathy, no urgency, just a sterile detachment that left David feeling utterly unheard, utterly alone. It was a familiar bitter taste for anyone who had ever navigated the faceless bureaucracy of a large system. The crushing realization that in a moment of crisis you might just be a number on a long list. He hung up the receiver heavy in his hand, a dawning, terrifying thought, solidifying in his mind. Help might not truly be coming. As the minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity, the orange glow intensified, devouring the distant hills, turning the sky into a hellish canvas. Text messages from neighbors began to flood David's phone. Grim updates confirming the rapid, relentless spread of the fire. "It's jumping the ridge," one read. "Evacuate if you can," another screamed. Then came a knock on the door, urgent and insistent. It was Ms. Eleanor Vance, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, her face etched with fear and a lifetime of wisdom. "David, Maria," she panted, her voice raspy. "You need to go. I just heard the scanners. They're overwhelmed. They can't get to everyone." Her words, delivered with a quiet desperation, underscored the terrifying reality. This wasn't just a threat to their property. It was a threat to their lives. David looked at his children, their innocent faces now pale with apprehension as they caught glimpses of the fiery spectacle outside. He had to be strong, had to be their rock. He knelt, taking Lena and Caleb's hands, his voice unwavering despite the tremor in his soul. "Kids," he began, "we need to go on an adventure. A quick one." He tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed the raw panic simmering beneath the surface. It was a parent's most terrifying duty to calmly explain a nightmare. Little did they know this was just the beginning of a far more insidious blaze, one fueled not by dry brush and fierce winds, but by something far more destructive, a burning betrayal. The roar of the fire was deafening now, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. Just as despair threatened to consume them, a beacon of hope pierced the smoke-filled air, the distinct wail of a siren growing louder closer. Then, through the swirling haze, they saw it, the gleaming red of a fire truck engine 37 pulling up to their driveway. Relief pure and unadulterated washed over David. "They're here. Thank God they're here," he choked out Maria, clutching his arm. Lena and Caleb peeking nervously from behind them. But the flicker of hope was short-lived, extinguished almost immediately by the unsettling sight before them. 4 firefighters disembarked from the truck, led by a burly man with a weathered face and a gaze as cold as steel. Captain Donovan. His uniform was impeccably clean, as were those of his team, an eerie detail given the raging inferno just meters away. There was no urgency in their movements, no frantic scramble to connect hoses or assess the immediate threat. They walked with a deliberate, almost lackadaisical pace, their expressions devoid of the typical professionalism David had always associated with first responders. A prickle of unease replaced the initial wave of relief. This wasn't how heroes behaved. "You the homeowner!" Captain Donovan barked, his voice gruff, his eyes sweeping over David's panicked face, then lingering on the opulent mansion with an unnerving sneer. "Look, Mr. Sterling, we're stretched thin tonight. You're lucky we even made it out here." His tone was dripping with condescension, an audible sneer that cut deeper than any insult. Behind him, the younger firefighters exchanged knowing glances, a few snickering one, muttering something under his breath about rich neighborhoods always thinking they're special. It was a cold, calculating dismissal, a subtle jab that landed squarely in David's gut. He was a successful black man, standing before them, begging for help for his family, and they looked at him with thinly veiled contempt. It was a familiar feeling, one he had fought his entire life to overcome, but never expected to encounter in a moment of pure, raw emergency. David, despite the mounting terror, felt a surge of indignation. "Captain, the fire is spreading rapidly. Our house is in imminent danger. My children are inside," he pleaded, pointing frantically towards the encroaching flames. That's when Captain Donovan's smirk hardened into something truly menacing. His eyes, devoid of any empathy, narrowed. "Let's just say," he drawled, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper that carried above the roar of the fire, "some folks are worth the effort, others not so much." Another firefighter, a young man with a cruel glint in his eye, chimed in. "People like you think your money and fame make you untouchable. Guess you're learning otherwise tonight." The word struck David like a physical blow. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. This was hatred unmasked and raw, aimed directly at him, at his family, at their very existence. The realization was gut-wrenching. Their home was not just threatened by fire, but by the deliberate malice of those sworn to protect them. The protectors had become predators. What followed was a horrific, agonizing ballet of deliberate inaction. The firefighters moved with a mocking slowness, barely aiming the hose a pathetic stream of water that seemed to evaporate before it even reached the flames. They chatted amongst themselves occasionally, glancing at the house with detached amusement, a macabre theater where David's family was the unwilling audience. "They're not trying?" Maria whispered, her voice cracking her face a mask of disbelief and horror. "They're letting it burn." The heat intensified, the smoke choked them, and then came the sound that would forever haunt David's nightmares, the shattering crack of their living room windows, followed by Lena's piercing scream. His sanctuary, his dream, his family's haven was being systematically devoured not by the wild, uncontrollable force of nature, but by the calculated indifference and racial animosity of Wet, who stood just feet away, watching it all turn to ash. David, the man who had fought countless fictional villains on screen, stood utterly powerless, witnessing the ultimate betrayal of trust. A scene of deliberate destruction he could never have written. The flames, once a distant threat, now roared around them, a fiery monument to injustice, and the burning betrayal was searing itself into his very soul. The first rays of dawn brought not solace, but a stark, brutal reality. Where their vibrant home once stood, now lay a skeletal remains, blackened timbers, reaching like desperate fingers into the smoky sky. The lingering smell of ash was a bitter perfume, mingling with the metallic tang of despair. Lena, usually so full of life, sat huddled in the car, her quiet sobs shaking her small frame. Caleb, typically boisterous, clutched his fists, his face a mask of bewildered anger. David held Maria tight, her face streaked with soot and tears, her quiet strength the only thing tethering him to sanity. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, seething rage that simmered in his gut. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was an act of deliberate malice, and he would not let it stand. "They didn't help because they didn't care," Maria whispered, her voice raw. "Because we're not the right kind of people to them." Her words, simple yet profound, articulated the painful truth that had just consumed their world. The moment the sun fully crested the hills, the vultures arrived. Not the feathered kind, but the human ones, a swarm of reporters and camera crews descending on their charred property. Microphones thrust forward, flashbulbs popping like a continuous blinding storm. They wanted a story, a soundbite, a celebrity tragedy. David, despite his internal turmoil, knew this was their only chance to turn raw pain into a powerful weapon. Maria, ever the warrior, stepped forward, her voice clear and resonant, despite the tremor in her hands. "Our home is gone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the hungry faces. "Not just because of the fire. The people who were supposed to help us stood by and did nothing. That's the story you should be telling." Her words were a raw, unfiltered accusation, delivered with the quiet dignity of a woman who had lost everything but her voice. Then it was David's turn. He looked directly into the lenses, into the countless homes that would be watching. "The team that came here last night," he stated, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed fury, "treated us like we didn't matter. They mocked us. They delayed, and they let our home burn because they didn't care. And for anyone who thinks I'm implying something, let me be clear, I'm saying it outright. The way they spoke to us, the way they acted, it wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. It was racist." His words, sharp and unequivocal, hung in the morning air, a declaration of war. The moment those clips hit the news and social media, an inferno of a different kind ignited. Hashtags exploded. #justice for Sterling, #firefighter accountability, #burned by bias. The story of the famous screenwriter and his family, left to watch their home burn, while firefighters stood by, resonated far beyond the hills of Malibu. Celebrities, activists, and crucially everyday people began sharing their own harrowing experiences of systemic racism and indifference in emergency services. Posts poured in, describing similar instances of delayed response, dismissive attitudes, and outright discrimination from those sworn to protect. It was a digital uprising, a collective howl of outrage that echoed a pain far older than the fire itself. The Canyon Creek Fire Services, caught in the crossfire, issued a terse statement denying any misconduct, promising a thorough internal review. But their words, cold and bureaucratic, sounded hollow against the roaring authenticity of the public's fury. Yet as always, with every wave of support came a tide of insidious doubt. The echo chamber of the internet, while amplifying their cry for justice, also gave voice to the whispers of cynicism, playing the race card. Some commented dismissing their trauma. Rich Hollywood elitists looking for attention. Others sneered, attempting to diminish their pain. Suddenly, David wasn't just a victim. He was being accused of exploiting his tragedy, of inventing discrimination. It was a familiar tactic, one used to silence and discredit those who dare to expose injustice. For a moment, a flicker of doubt, a weariness threatened to consume him. Was it worth it? He wondered. But then he looked at Maria, at Lena, and Caleb, their eyes still haunted by the flames and the faces of those who had let their home burn. No, this wasn't just for them. This was for every voice silenced, every injustice swept under the rug. He would not be deterred. This was not just a fire. It was a crucible, and from its ashes a fight would ignite. The pre-dawn light, usually a gentle promise of a new day, now cast a desolate, unforgiving glow on what remained of the Sterling sanctuary. All that was left was a charred skeleton, a ghostly outline against the smoldering ruins. The acrid smell of ash hung heavy in the air, a pungent reminder of everything they had lost. Lena, usually so vivacious, sat quietly in the back of their borrowed car, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Caleb, his face smudged with soot, gripped his hands into tight fists, his youthful eyes holding a silent rage that mirrored David's own. David looked at Maria. Her face streaked with tears and dirt, yet her eyes held an unyielding resolve. "It's all gone." He whispered the words, catching in his throat, raw with despair. Maria reached out her fingers, gently tracing the outline of his jaw. "Our home is gone, yes," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But we are not. And they didn't help us, David. They didn't help because they didn't care. Because we're not the right kind of people to them." Her simple words, uttered in the raw vulnerability of their greatest loss, cut through the shock and grief, striking a chord of fierce determination within David. This wasn't just about a house. This was about a systemic rot, a deep-seated prejudice that had just manifested in the most devastating way imaginable. By mid-morning, the chaos had escalated. Reporters, a relentless swarm, descended upon the scorched remains of their property, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. They wanted a story, a soundbite from the famous screenwriter who had just lost everything. David, still reeling, felt a surge of exhaustion. But Maria, ever his fiercest advocate, stepped forward. Her voice, though hoarse from the smoke, resonated with an unshakable power. "Our home is gone," she declared, her eyes blazing. "Not just because of the fire. The people who were supposed to help us, the Canyon Creek Fire Services, they stood by and did nothing. That's the story you should be telling." The words hung in the air, a raw, undeniable accusation. David, seeing her strength, found his own. He stepped beside her, facing the cameras, his voice resonating with an authority that had commanded countless movie sets. "The team that came here last night treated us like we didn't matter." He stated every word. Precise, weighted with truth. "They mocked us. They delayed. And they let our home burn because they didn't care about saving our home, our family." He paused, letting the silence amplify his next words. "I'm not implying it, I'm saying it outright. The way they spoke to us, the way they acted, it wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate." The declaration hung in the air, a seismic shockwave. The reporters scrambled, their faces a mixture of shock and hungry anticipation. This wasn't just a fire story. This was a story of profound injustice. Within hours, Maria's raw accusation and David's unwavering declaration ignited a digital inferno. Clips of their press conference went viral, exploding across social media platforms. Hashtags like #JusticeForSterling and #FirefighterAccountability began trending globally, picked up by millions who had felt the sting of similar indifference, or worse, outright malice, from systems meant to serve them. Celebrities, fellow screenwriters, Civil rights activists and ordinary citizens shared their own harrowing experiences of systemic racism within emergency services. The digital roar was deafening, a collective scream for justice from a nation that recognized the familiar pattern of betrayal. The Canyon Creek Fire Services, in a swift but hollow response, issued a sterile statement denying misconduct, promising a thorough internal review. But their words were drowned out by the authentic outrage of the public, their denials ringing hollow against the emotional truth laid bare by the Sterlings. Yet amidst the overwhelming wave of support came the inevitable backlash. The dark underbelly of the internet emerged an echo chamber of doubt and dismissal. Anonymous accounts and cynical commentators filled comment sections with vitriol accusing David of playing the race card, of being an entitled Hollywood elitist who believed his money should buy him special treatment. "Just another rich guy complaining," one comment sneered. "He's just trying to cash in on a tragedy." It was a common tactic, one designed to discredit victims of systemic injustice by accusing them of exaggeration or seeking attention. It was a vicious twist designed to undermine their credibility and dilute the message. But for David, it only solidified his resolve. He knew this wasn't about money. This was about truth. This was about fighting for every voiceless individual who had ever been told their life didn't matter. The ashes of his home were a testament to their injustice, and from those ashes, a fight was being ignited. The battle had just begun, and David Sterling was ready. The initial wave of public outrage had been a powerful torrent, but social media by its very nature was a fickle beast. The Canyon Creek Fire Services launched a PR offensive, painting themselves as overstretched heroes battling an unprecedented blaze, subtly implying that the Sterlings were simply privileged individuals seeking to exploit a tragedy. Doubt began to creep in, fueled by online trolls and cynical news commentators. David felt the shift, the insidious erosion of trust that threatened to swallow their truth whole. "They're trying to bury us, Maria," he confessed late one night, the weight of the fight pressing down on him. Maria, ever practical, simply said, "Then we dig deeper." And dig deeper they did. The unexpected twist arrived not in a courtroom but in David's email inbox. The subject line read, "Footage from Serenity Ridge." It was from Ms. Eleanor Vance, their elderly neighbor, the one who had urged them to evacuate. David's heart hammered against his ribs as he clicked the attachment. The video quality wasn't perfect, grainy, and slightly distorted by the smoke, but the images were unmistakable. Engine 37, the firefighters standing idle, their backs to the raging inferno. And then the audio chillingly clear. Captain Donovan's gruff voice, thick with contempt. "Let it burn. He's got insurance, probably more money than we'll see in a lifetime." Another voice, younger, more sneering, chimed in. "And here I thought these folks didn't like fire. Guess we proved that wrong tonight." David watched, his jaw clenched, a cold fury settling in his gut. The raw wound of betrayal ripped open anew, but this time it was accompanied by a surge of vindication. This wasn't just proof of negligence, it was proof of intent. This was the smoking gun. Armed with this damning footage, the Sterlings sought counsel. They found Valerie Brooks, a civil rights attorney renowned for her tenacity and her unwavering commitment to justice. Valerie was a force of nature in a tailored suit, her eyes sharp, intelligent, and fiercely compassionate. In their first meeting, David showed her the video. Valerie watched in silence, her expression unreadable until the final frame. Then she looked up, a grim determination setting her features. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This video isn't just proof of negligence, it's proof of intent. They didn't just fail to do their jobs, they deliberately chose not to. And we are going to make them answer for it." She warned them of the battle ahead. "They're going to fight back hard. The fire department has a lot to lose. They'll try to discredit you to discredit this video." But her conviction was infectious, reigniting the flame of hope within David. Valerie immediately filed a motion to subpoena the Canyon Creek Fire Service's internal records. What they unearthed was a shocking revelation. Emails, incident reports, and past complaints previously buried or dismissed painted a grim picture of a department riddled with systemic prejudice. There was a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior, ignored pleas from minority residents, and internal investigations that consistently cleared firefighters of any wrongdoing despite credible accusations. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was a rotten orchard. The cracks in the system were laid bare for all to see. Adding another layer of undeniable truth, Valerie brought in Marcus Thorne, a retired black firefighter from the very same department. Marcus, a man of quiet integrity, provided a damning internal perspective. He testified that Captain Donovan had a long-standing history of racial bias, and that the department fostered a culture that needs to change, where prejudice was not just tolerated, but at times implicitly encouraged. He spoke of subtle slights, overlooked promotions, and outright hostile remarks he'd witnessed over his decades of service. His testimony was a powerful validation, an insider's view that corroborated every agonizing detail of the Sterling's ordeal. As the evidence mounted, the Canyon Creek Fire Services, desperate to avoid a public trial that would expose their systemic rot, made a stunning offer. They proposed a substantial financial settlement, a hefty sum designed to make the Sterlings disappear to silence their story. It was the easy way out, the path of least resistance. David and Maria looked at each other, their minds flashing back to the burning embers of their home, to Lena and Caleb's terrified faces. There was a moment of temptation, a fleeting thought of simply taking the money and rebuilding their lives in peace. But then David shook his head. "We're not taking their money," he told Valerie, his voice firm, resolute. "This isn't about a payout. This is about justice for every family they've wronged, every voice they've silenced. This is about making sure this never happens again." It was a critical twist in their journey, a definitive statement of their unwavering commitment to principles over personal gain. The battle was set, and the crucible of justice awaited. The air in the courtroom was thick-heavy with anticipation. Every seat was packed a sea of faces, reporters with their notebooks poised, activists holding signs, and ordinary citizens, many of them people of color who had traveled for hours to witness this pivotal moment. David and Maria sat side by side, their hands clasped, their eyes fixed on the entrance. Across the aisle, Captain Donovan and his team, grim-faced and defiant, sat with their defense counsel. The tension was palpable, a silent hum of expectation that permeated every corner of the room. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning. When Valerie Brooks, sharp and poised, rose for her opening statement, a hush fell over the courtroom. Her voice, clear and resonant, sliced through the quiet. "This case," she began, sweeping her gaze across the jury, "is not simply about negligence. It is about a conscious choice to withhold help, a deliberate act of malice, because of who that family was, because of the color of their skin." She painted a vivid picture of the Sterling's nightmare, of their frantic pleas falling on deaf ears, of the chilling dialogue caught on camera. The defense attorney, in stark contrast, attempted to frame the firefighters as overworked heroes, overwhelmed by a historic blaze, scapegoated by a rich, demanding celebrity. He spoke of unprecedented conditions and unfair accusations. But his words felt hollow, lacking the emotional resonance of Valerie's heartfelt plea. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The courtroom's lights dimmed, and the screen behind the witness stand flickered to life. Valerie Brooks, with deliberate slowness, began to play Ms. Eleanor Vance's security camera footage. The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear the subtle whir of the projector. Gasps rippled through the jury as they watched Captain Donovan and his team move with agonizing slowness, their uniforms suspiciously clean, their expressions smug. Whispers of their racist remarks, caught clearly on the recording, echoed through the speakers. "Let it burn. He's got insurance, probably more money than we'll see in a lifetime." The clip played only for a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When the lights came back on, the weight of what had just been witnessed hung heavy in the air. Valerie's voice, now a quiet, chilling indictment, broke the silence. "This is not the behavior of overwhelmed professionals, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This is the behavior of individuals who chose to let a family suffer because they thought it was funny, because they thought it didn't matter." The jury's faces were a mixture of shock, disgust, and a dawning understanding. The silent witness had spoken, and its testimony was damning. The defense scrambled, attempting to discredit the footage to paint it as an anomaly. But Valerie was relentless. She called Marcus Thorne, the retired black firefighter, to the stand. Marcus, with quiet dignity, recounted years of entrenched prejudice within the Canyon Creek Fire Services, confirming Captain Donovan's long-standing bigotry. "This isn't an isolated incident," he stated, his voice resonating with authority. "It's part of a culture that's been allowed to fester, to rot from the inside out." Valerie then presented the internal emails and dismissed complaints, exposing a chilling pattern of discrimination within the department. The final nail in the coffin came during cross-examination. One of Captain Donovan's younger firefighters, visibly sweating under Valerie's relentless questioning, finally cracked. "I didn't mean it seriously," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously. "It was just a joke." Valerie's voice, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, cut him off. "A joke while a family's home was burning down? Is that what you call professionalism?" The young man withered under her gaze. The defense had nothing left. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was less than a day. Every minute was a torment of anxious anticipation for David and Maria. Finally, the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached. The courtroom held its breath. When the foreperson stood and read the verdict, "Guilty of negligence, misconduct, and discrimination." A collective gasp, then a wave of cheers erupted through the courtroom. Tears streamed down Maria's face as David squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of their long, arduous journey. Captain Donovan and his team sat stunned, their faces ashen. The judge's pronouncement of significant financial damages and an independent review of the entire Canyon Creek Fire Services policies cemented their victory. Outside the courthouse, a jubilant crowd awaited them. David, holding Maria's hand, faced the cameras, his voice brimming with emotion but firm with conviction. "This isn't just a victory for my family," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the faces of those who had supported them. "It's a victory for everyone who's ever been told that their lives don't matter. We've shown that when we stand together, when we demand accountability, we can create change." The battle in the courtroom was over, but the larger fight for justice had just begun, fueled by their unwavering resolve. The roar of the courtroom crowd had faded. The headlines had softened, but the Sterlings knew their journey was far from over. The verdict was a victory, yes, but it was also a stark reminder of the countless others who had suffered in silence, without a voice, without the platform David possessed. Sitting in the quiet of their temporary residence, surrounded by borrowed belongings, a new purpose began to crystallize. "This isn't just for us, David," Maria said softly, her eyes meeting his. "How many people go through this but don't have the platform to make their voices heard? We've been lucky. A lot of people don't." David nodded, the truth of her words resonating deep within him. Their pain, their public battle, could become a catalyst. From the ashes of their own loss, a new flame of hope could ignite for others. That was the genesis of the Phoenix Fund. The establishment of the Phoenix Fund was not merely an announcement. It was a tireless endeavor. David and Maria poured their hearts and souls into it, assembling a dream team of legal experts, community activists, and disaster recovery specialists. Maria, with her innate ability to connect with people, spearheaded the outreach tirelessly, seeking out families who had suffered similar devastating experiences, often without the spotlight of fame to illuminate their plight. She heard stories that mirrored their own: a single mother in Oakland, her home destroyed by a faulty gas line, denied assistance because of her zip code. A black business owner in Atlanta, whose storefront was looted after a protest, then ignored by city authorities when seeking reconstruction aid. An elderly couple in rural Mississippi, their entire life savings swept away by a flood, dismissed by insurance adjusters. Each story was a fresh wound, but also a testament to the urgent need for the Phoenix Fund. These were the hidden casualties, the silent victims, and their experiences fueled the Sterlings' resolve. The official launch event for the Phoenix Fund was a powerful, emotionally charged evening. Celebrities, fellow philanthropists, and civil rights leaders filled the grand ballroom. But it was the presence of the impacted families, their faces etched with a mixture of pain and cautious hope, that truly made the night special. When David took the stage, the spotlight found him not as a Hollywood icon, but as a man who had walked through fire and emerged with a mission. Losing our home was one of the hardest things Maria and I have ever faced. He began, his voice raw with emotion. But what made it even harder was knowing that it didn't have to happen. That the help we desperately needed was deliberately withheld because of who we are. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the room. But out of that pain, we found purpose. The Phoenix Fund is about more than just rebuilding homes. It's about rebuilding lives, restoring dignity, and ensuring that no one, no matter their background, ever feels invisible in their darkest hour. It was a heartfelt promise, a rallying cry for justice, and a moment of deep, profound connection with everyone in attendance. The Phoenix Fund quickly soared. Its first major initiative was a comprehensive grant program for wildfire-affected families in underrepresented communities, ensuring that aid reached those who often fell through the cracks. David and Maria didn't just lend their names. They were hands-on, their authenticity undeniable. They visited devastated communities, walking through charred landscapes, meeting families in temporary shelters, listening to their heartbreaking stories, and offering not just financial aid, but genuine empathy. It was during one such visit to a small, diverse town in Northern California, nearly wiped out by a recent wildfire, that David experienced a moment that deeply solidified their purpose. He met a young black boy named Jamal, no older than Caleb, whose eyes widened in recognition. You're David Sterling," Jamal whispered, awe in his voice. Later, Jamal's mother, her voice thick with emotion, approached David. "Thank you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "What you're doing, it gives people like us hope, real hope." In that moment, David understood the true power of their platform, transforming their personal tragedy into a tangible force for collective good. Beyond grants, the Phoenix Fund launched powerful advocacy campaigns, lobbying for critical reforms in emergency services and disaster response policies, ensuring equity and accountability became the bedrock of every system. They weren't just helping individuals. They were working to change the very landscape of justice. The land where their dream home once stood was now cleared, stripped bare, but not lifeless. A faint, almost nostalgic scent of ash still lingered on the breeze, a quiet whisper of the past. David stood on the empty lot, gazing at the sweeping vista. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small, smooth stone they had engraved. It read, "From ashes we rise." With a quiet reverence, he knelt and buried it just deep enough at the edge of the property, a hidden personal reminder of everything they had overcome. This wasn't just dirt beneath his feet. It was hallowed ground, transformed by fire and resilience. Maria joined him, her hand slipping into his. "It's not about the place, is it, David?" she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "It's about us. About what we've built together, and what we're building now for others." Their decision to rebuild not just a house, but a home that would incorporate a community center was a powerful statement, a physical manifestation of their commitment to turn pain into purpose. The fight, they knew, was far from over. Systemic change moved at a glacial pace, and there would always be those who sought to diminish their efforts or question their motives. But the overwhelming wave of support, the heartfelt gratitude from families they had helped, fueled their unwavering resolve. There were still battles to be fought, policies to be changed, and minds to be opened. Yet the small victories, the personal connections, affirmed their path. Just last week, David had revisited the diverse Northern California town, the one the Phoenix Fund had helped rebuild after the wildfire. He saw new homes, rising gardens blooming, and a spirit of communal resilience that had taken root in the ashes. A young girl, Imani, no older than Lena, with bright, curious eyes, approached him shyly. "Are you Mr. Sterling?" she asked. When he nodded, she beamed. "My grandma says you helped us get our new house. She says you're a hero." David knelt to her level, a warm